SH Figuarts Thanos is in the DorkLair! Welcome to another DorkLair action figure review. Today I'm taking a look at the SH Figuarts Thanos from Avengers Endgame, and I won't mention that movie at all in this review because I know a lot of people haven't seen it yet. This figure released right in time with that movie, and it's only a couple days old, so I won't talk about it at all. He is wearing a very similar armor at the beginning of Infinity War, so I can mention that a little bit. Overall, I think this is an excellent release. This figure is fantastic looking. It's got a nice gauntlet, and he's got a nice clean paint job. Probably could use a little weathering, but I don't really mind. I know some people get a little bent out of shape when their figures aren't properly weathered. I don't mind it though. It's got a nice clean kind of SH Figuarts aesthetic to it. It might be limited a little bit in the articulation, but that's mostly because he's big and bulky, though I do wish there were a couple points that they included. And with that, let's jump into this review. Now, I don't collect too many MCU Figuarts figures, but I can tell you that this is a much different style of packaging than they normally do. It's got a matte finish. You can see it's all white. Got an image of the figure on the back. But just the overall look of this thing is so much different than a lot of the other figures in the line. And I believe from the front, all of the Endgame figures are going to basically have the same kind of packaging, whereas some of the other ones are a little bit different. So it's kind of a little generic. I don't love it. It's not like my favorite look for packaging. Like something like the Captain Marvel that's very unique to that character and just kind of styled with that character is really cool. This is a little just kind of bland and generic for me. Starting off with the sculpt, paint, and detail on Thanos, you can take a look at his head sculpt, his helmet here. Lots of nice sculpting and panel work. It doesn't have a ton of paint necessarily, but it looks really crisp. And I like how essentially it's multiple pieces, so that it does look like a helmet on top of a head rather than all just sort of one big sculpted piece. It gives a little bit of more of like a realistic kind of look to it there. You can see the lines are super cleanly painted on that side, on this side. Kind of looking at the top of his head, looks really nice. There is that seam, which is part of the assembly when you're switching out the face plates. So, that's a little bit, unattractive, so to speak, but I don't mind it too much. Like when you're looking at them like from the side and the front and stuff, it really doesn't, it's not as noticeable. It just looks like another panel line or something on there. So yeah, it looks pretty good. Head sculpt, you got the face in there. His eyes are painted straight. Again, not a ton of color variation here. There's a little shading on the chin. You can see on the bottom there a little bit of paint work on the chin. I maybe would have liked a little more wash in there to bring out the distinct Thanos chin. And yeah, the sculpt is really nice. I even can see that like Josh Brolin kind of thing going on there, like the animated Brolin purple look. So yeah, pretty nicely sculpted head here. You can see the neck there's a little bit of flesh neck underneath there, and then it transitions into the armor, which is layered where the articulation points are. Very nicely sculpted, clean paint. And so you can see that there's a couple different shades of this like dark blue going on here. Right there is a very dark and shiny blue, and then under the armpit where it has this other style of kind of material, it's supposed to be like it's a more of a matte color. So there's a little variety there. Like sort of these pieces here match up a little bit with the color scheme here. It's a little flatter, not quite as shiny. And then the same thing, like those pieces in here. So you have like the shiny metallic mixed with the shiny blue, and then mixed in with the like matte stuff that kind of looks like undersuit. So it gives it a nice range of look and a depth of material and consistency. It's pretty cool that way. And then you have this soft piece here, like a sort of a vinyl material that's glued on at the waist and wraps all the way around and has a flap in the back. You can see the sculpt work, paint on the back. I don't really have anything no sloppy paint or anything. Even the armbands on his arm, they look nice and clean. And then the flesh of his arm is that same color on as his face is, and you can see a little sculpted in there of like the way his skin kind of folds there. The legs have a lot of the same styling going on, and you can see the sculpt work into the boots. And looking at the gauntlet, you can see it is very beautifully sculpted, and then 5 of the 6 stones are actually like separate pieces that are clear plastic, so they give a little shimmer as you kind of move it around, and they're inserted there. And then this one is just sculpted in, I believe. That's not a separate piece, but I believe that is one of the stones over there. So yeah, so it's a pretty good looking gauntlet, nicely sculpted. And then it comes with 3 different versions of the gauntlet, so we can look at those when we get into the accessories. Okay, and for some size comparisons, the only other SH Figuarts MCU figure I have is the Infinity War Hulk, and this is kind of cool. This is basically what the two were looking like when they battled at the beginning of Infinity War, and I looked back at that scene, and they seem to scale pretty well. I think Thanos was a little bit smaller than Hulk in that scene, so this fits pretty well. That Hulk figure is awesome. It does have some purple custom pants from Harker Customs on, so that's why it looks a little bit different. And continuing with MCU, I do have a couple Mezco MCU figures. So the first one I have here is the Black Panther figure. Awesome figure, looks pretty good. And the Thor, which, might seem a little small perhaps in comparison, because Thor's supposed to be a pretty big guy, but generally speaking, I think they look pretty well together. And finally, in a bit of a cosmic threat kind of a theme, I have the Mezco 112 Collective Darkseid. And you can see that they look pretty well together. I mean, the Darkseid is a much differently proportioned figure, a much different style. It's actually one of my favorite figures this year so far. But yeah, so there you have a few size comparisons. For accessories, he comes with this opened gauntlet hand. It's basically sort of a relaxed hand, which is a little bit different from the open other gauntleted hand, which has more of like a grasping action kind of pose to it. And then he's got this open right hand, this regular hand, and a gripping hand here, and then the 2 hands that were on the figure itself are just like the fists, the regular fists. You have the regular fist and then the gauntleted fist there. I gotta say that swapping out the hands makes me incredibly nervous, because there's this thing where for added articulation, the wrist joint pops out. It slides up like this, in and out, and then on top of that, you have to pop the hand off right here. And it just makes me really nervous that, with this big, tight joint, it makes me nervous that that piece down there is going to yank out or pull or pop or something. And it's the same thing with the gauntleted side. So be super careful when you're swapping the hands out. I always push it back in first before I try to pop it back on. But they go on there pretty nice. I haven't had any break, but it just feels like there's some potential there for it to snap off. And the final accessory he comes with is this weapon here. A few different colors painted in there. It's nicely sculpted, and it actually comes apart there so that you can get it into his grip a lot easier than trying to flex the fingers around it. And yeah, it's a really nice piece. It's got a little bit of black paint right there to add to the look of it, and then the gold paint of the handle. Nice shiny silver and a few chips along the edge. He's got a couple different swap out faces. He's got this angry gritted teeth face sculpt, and then he's got a grinning face sculpt. So adds a lot to the posability and options to the character, to the figure. Okay, finally for the accessories, the last thing is I'll show you how the head comes apart so you can get a sense of how you can make it look like the helmet is separate, especially if you have the first release. I would imagine if the head is swappable, you should be able to do this. So you can pull the back plate off, and the face just kind of comes right out, and then you can put the piece back together like this. And like obviously you can see the inner workings of it, but you have basically a separate helmet, and you know, like you have that. You can't put the head on. Like maybe you can sit it on there somehow, but like it's not gonna necessarily look right. So you can maybe catch the right angle and do that. But I imagine if you have the head from the other figure, you might be able to do this. But otherwise, yeah, it's not. You know, it's a separate helmet, but it's not really a separate head. There's no back. I wish it had included like a back part to the head. It just doesn't. And finally, for the articulation, this is probably where this figure is the weakest because it is an SH Figuarts. I kind of expect a little bit more articulation on the guy, but he's so bulky that it can be sort of understandable that it's hard to get that articulation in. So the head, very little movement backwards. You can't even go up with the head at all, but he can look down a little bit. So that much movement in the head. And then, you know, you can move side to side, and there is articulation at the base of the neck too. So there's a little bit of expression there, but not a ton going on. You can't really have him look over to the side unless his head is cocked. So kind of a little weird there. But some options, there's like a good number of articulation points, but not a lot of range. So the shoulder can swing down a little bit inside the joint. So there is a little bit of movement there. Mine is super tight swinging this way. You can hear it cranking really tight. I get a little bit nervous with that peg in there. So, you know, I'm trying to be super careful with that. Maybe I need to spray it with a little something to kind of like grease it up. And then you can see there's a shoulder butterfly joint in there, but mine doesn't stay, like it kind of just bounces back. It doesn't stay in place really. So, yeah, it's a little tricky in that shoulder. This shoulder's a little smoother. Things move around a little easier. So that's kind of nice on that side. His arms don't come down to his sides very much. Like he's like always got his arms out. So that's, you know, a little bit of a limitation there. And then there's no rotation in the upper arm. There's nothing up there. So, there's no like bicep swivel. So it's really tricky when it comes to articulation. But as you kind of ratchet that down and up, he can reach up this far, and, you know, swing his arm around. And I'm super hesitant to work this arm a lot, because it's so tight that in there, it's just super tight. He does have a double jointed elbow, so he can get his fist up nice and high there. So a decent amount of range there with his fist. And like I showed you earlier, there's a great amount of articulation in the wrist because this pops out, swivels all the way around, really nice there. And the gauntlet hand has the same thing going on. And this elbow's got about the same range. So nice elbow articulation. My right shoulder is super tight. I need to grease that up or something because it's driving me nuts right now. Okay, and then in the torso, the upper torso's articulation, so he can kind of like crunch back that far and forward that far in the upper torso, and in the lower torso, he can move back that far and forward that far. So you combine those, and you get a decent amount of crunch back and forth. He can rotate at the waist pretty well, and he's got a little bit of side to side, but this side of the armor and this side of the armor, there's not a ton of gap there, so there's not much movement there. His body does pop off pretty easily right there. You can see the joint there, and you can kind of see into where the legs are. The legs are nicely articulated. They do drop down, and then they can kick forward really far, and then back that far. He can do the splits. Again, if he drops down, he can do the splits about that much. Pull him back up here. There's no thigh cut, but there is a little bit of rotation. And then his knees can bend up this far, about 90 degrees. Again, lots of armor in there. And then there's a little bit of a rotation at the bottom of the knee. The feet can hinge down this much and hinge up this much. And then they can rock side to side just a little bit. Not a ton. They will swivel, but there's limitation based on the armor that's around the edge of the boot there. And then he does have a toe hinge as well. So probably the weakest part of this figure is the articulation, just because I expect a lot more when it comes to Figuarts, but for a bigger guy, he's pretty good. And you can get him into a variety of different poses. It's just not perfect. It's just not everything you'd ever want. Overall, I like this figure very much. Articulation aside, and the fact that he doesn't have much for weathering are probably the only little gripes I have with it. I think the gauntlet looks awesome with those clear stones. I think the face sculpt looks really good. The helmet looks nice. I wish the heads had a back plate so that you could, have him helmetless. But, it is what it is. I'm pretty sure you could probably swap the Infinity War head onto it. So overall, really nice looking figure. Very happy to have it in the collection. That'll just about do it for me today. Make sure you check out my other videos like my Mezco Mythic Legions, SH Figuarts, movie realization, all that stuff. Check out the DorkLair podcast. Follow me on Instagram at the DorkLair. And until next time, may the force be with you. DorkLair.